Chris Notes from Culture Trip. Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We are super excited because you don't speak very often, right?
I don't speak very often?
At conferences, at startup events.
I didn't used to. I do a bit more now.
Okay, so thank you for coming. We appreciate that. When I was learning about and preparing for this talk, I've learned that Culture Trip is actually way bigger than I expected. How did you manage to be so quiet and come under the radar?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think we've been literally only doing that, working under the radar, working hard. And then we did our big Series B round in April where we raised 80 million. And then even if we didn't want to hide, we could no longer hide. We were suddenly out there.
Okay, so you have a big suitcase here with 80 million in it? Okay, so let's hear it. Now, please tell us, how many of you have not heard about Culture Trip? Okay, so about 25%. So for those who have not heard about Culture Trip, we have a short video which we want to show you. And this video will explain what the company is about. Let's hear it.
Culture Trip empowers people to explore the world's kaleidoscope of cultural differences via our website, app, social channels, and emerging technology. We connect people with local culture through our international community of content creators, a network of hundreds of writers, photographers, videographers, illustrators, and animators, based in inspiring locations all around the world. Our fast-growing audience are switched-on, independent, mature millennials. We motivate them to explore different locations, perspectives, trends, and ideas, to learn more, do more, see more, experience more. Join us on a culture trip.
So this is it. Thank you. Chris, you have around 20 million people coming to your website every single month.
Yep.
How did you manage to build it into such big proportions?
We build it actually almost entirely through content. So we publish articles and, as you can see, videos, photographs, illustrations, animations. And we do that via a large distributed workforce of creators who are based all over the world, which has allowed us to produce about 2,000 articles a month at times. And doing that relentlessly for years and years has given us a very large presence in search in particular. So that was one clear route. The other route was particularly, I think, in the last 2 years, video. We managed to have about 2 billion views on our videos.
Wow.
So we really worked very well with the Facebook algorithm when it was still in place. And then now, as we become bigger and better known, people come, of course, directly.
Like you, so you got lots of views on video, so you have good content. And when I was preparing for this talk, I also noticed that the content is way better than I expected, to be honest. So well on that. I love travel. Who doesn't? So I'm reading more and more articles which you have. And one of the articles I've heard that you might be releasing is the top 10 destinations for next year, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Do you know which they are? Can you share a secret?
I'm not allowed to say, I think.
Oh, really? When is it coming out? Tomorrow morning. Okay, so we won't be the lucky ones who will find out before anybody else? Okay, so tomorrow morning, we can share an email after this with a link so you can have a look. Now, Chris, how did you become an entrepreneur?
I don't think I became an entrepreneur. I think I always was. I just happened to have studied something that you don't typically tend to associate with entrepreneurship. In my case, psychiatry. So I'm a medical doctor by background. But I think I always was. I was very entrepreneurial in medicine. This was meant to happen. My family is very entrepreneurial. I just was the odd one out that didn't do that, but I couldn't help myself and ended up doing it as well.
How did your colleagues deal with you and your entrepreneurial nature? Back when you were a doctor?
Yeah, a combination of pity and bewilderment, I would say. Mostly bewilderment. People being perplexed by leaving a relatively lucrative, stable medical career. no surprise about me building something, but leaving medicine to do something creative. And in fact, the first idea for Culture was an online bookstore, which was admittedly a very bad idea. And they did tell me that.
Okay, nice. The audience, if you have any questions for Chris, we allow you to ask away. And it's super simple. We have this Slido link, and all you have to do is just pull out your mobile phone. You can do it now, and open your browser. It's that simple. No need to download any app. You open your browser, and you type in slido.com, sli.do.com. And the hashtag, as you can see behind me, is SG Europe. And you can ask away. I promise the top questions will be answered, and which ones you will decide, because you can vote for questions you like. You can also ask questions, and you can also vote for questions you like. So we'll be taking these questions along the way in the context of what you're discussing. So Chris, after you've been a doctor, and how did you decide to just quit and just do something else?
There was a number of reasons for it. I mean, I was mostly in academia and really enjoyed that. Did a lot of research. And I became, I think, gradually both satisfied and a little bit frustrated. I mean, if you have an entrepreneurial temperament, academia is slow, decision-making is slow, progress is incremental. So I wanted to get out of that. And I had always had the intention, in life at least, to do two things. One was to create a work of art, as in written work of art. That was something that I really wanted to do. And build my own company. So I've started with the former. When I was thinking of leaving psychiatry, I first wrote the play and then submitted that play to the London theatres. And then, because in my crazy impatient way, didn't get an answer within a month, I thought, okay, this is not working. And then I started Culture Trip. And then somewhere 4 months later or so, I found out that actually the play was quite well received, and that some of the theatres were interested in considering it for staging.
And what happened with it?
It sits on my shelves. Culture Trip took over a little bit, to put it mildly. We're very keen to go back to it at a later stage. I mean, I really enjoyed the process of creation, but I did also realize that I was not a writer. As in, I don't want to write for a living, but I will definitely want to get that work out when the time is there.
Interesting. Okay, and then you started Culture Trip. How did you decide, going from scratch, which website, which domain to register?
Yeah, so I actually knew, I mean, I come from an entrepreneurial family, but no digital entrepreneurs, some biotech, but not digital. So I actually knew nothing, and they are all in Belgium, where there is no, well, there wasn't, and there still isn't, there's no strong VC industry. In fact, I didn't know what a VC was, if I'm perfectly honest. And I had no awareness of needing to solve a user need. I only thought of my own need, and my own petty need, if you like, was to find books of fiction set in countries I traveled to. That was my need. So therefore, I set out to solve that need. And I went to pretty much live in Waterstones for about 3 weeks, and stalked customers and talked to staff. And one of the things that became very apparent, I mean, I knew that already anyways, but it became more confirmed, was that if you, for example, want to find a work of fiction set in Burundi, that's hard. That is actually hard, because the staff is obviously, not diverse, to put it mildly, and the books are all organized alphabetically. So if you don't know the name of that writer from Burundi, you're not going to find it. There is a petty little shelf called Black Literature, which is in itself a bizarre name. So it was clear, or it became clear, that that problem was there. How much the demand was, or the need for others to have that solved, I didn't know, and I didn't necessarily care either. So I purchased the license for all the bibliographic data available in the world, and then wrote an algorithm to organize that by country and genre. So the first incarnation of Culture Trip became a website still called theculturetrip.com. And it had sections for every country in the world, and you could find books of fiction for every country in the world. Okay.
There's a question here from the audience. So how did you come up with the name Culture Trip?
There were 3 contenders. I need to think if I actually remember them. The one was called, one word that was coined was World Up. I can hardly pronounce it, so that was not going to happen. The second one was coup, which made no sense to me at all, because no non-native speaker knows what that means. And the guys that coined it said that it stood for country of origin, but I didn't buy that. And then there was Culture Trip, and I liked that. I liked it and I disliked it. I didn't like the fact that it was long, But I like the fact that it had a sort of dual meaning. It had indeed the suggestion of a cultural trip, as in reading a book of fiction set in a place without going there. But it also had that slightly rebellious tone by taking a trip on culture, as in a drug trip. So I like that dual meaning, albeit that drug trip most people haven't actually clocked that, but I like that idea. So that's what it is.
So now you have a domain, and you started as a blog, or you wanted to have contributors by default at the beginning?
No, nothing at all. It was a bookstore, and I wanted to sell books.
Okay.
And then something funny happened, something unexpected happened. Well, two unexpected things happened for me, at least. One, nobody was interested in the bookstore, but that could have been predicted because there's Amazon. And then the second unexpected thing was that Google somehow picked up on our existence. And they wrote to me and said, oh, would you want to come and talk about this website of yours at the Cultural Institute in Paris?
Okay.
Because they found it very interesting that we had organized books by country. So I did that, and they then planted the seed of ambition in my head that I actually didn't have at that point in time, that this was actually something interesting.
Yeah.
And on the back of that, I realized that if it was really meant to become a business, that it was not going to come from the books. And we started to write some articles about books and films. And then you start to see the first user traction. And then, but this took 4 years, right? This was then with little or no money, expanding the content we were writing and going beyond books and films. So we started to write about more visual things like art and design and architecture. And as soon as we did that, the audience went up further. The big breakthrough was somewhere around the 2-year point where we started to write about food. And once we wrote about food, the thing was off. Food, you think about it 3 times a day, you need no reminder, it's very democratic, it's not as highbrow as books and films. And yeah, that was a journey of actually 3 or 4 years with little or no money. I mean, every 3 months we ran out of money, but always increasing audience. And then at the end of those 4 years, we no longer could afford an office, but we had 1 million users. And then finally could raise a proper seed money round of 2 million. And since then, we haven't really looked back.
Okay. So you're saying that when you incorporate culture, then it's a takeoff. I was recently at the Tate Modern in the members club, and they had this Culture Trip magazine on there. I was quite surprised, nicely surprised. So you definitely are known in the culture scene. What is your sweet spot? Are you positioning Culture Trip as a media, travel media magazine, or is it more about culture? We think about it slightly differently. I mean, our output, if you like, or our product is all about creativity and media. Our business model, though, is not media. Our business model is travel. So we're trying to win, or we think we can win in media by applying a travel business model, which is far more lucrative. And we think that through our creativity and media features that we can differentiate in travel. So that's how we think of ourselves, as a tech company that merges elements of entertainment and media with elements of travel. So you start as a bookstore, and how did you pivot into the next phase?
I feel we never pivoted. I feel we constantly evolved and got better at what we did.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the first years was finding that kind of demand in the world for the sort of stuff we did and get better at fine-tuning it. And secondly, doing it at a cost that could be scaled. As long as we were producing content from within an office, it could never really scale because you would need an incredible amount of people and an incredibly big office that we could no doubt not afford. So once we realized that and we found a model of distributing a workforce and commissioning via a small group of people in-house, from then we knew we had a model that worked.
Okay. And you say then you eventually run out of money and then you have to raise. What are your experiences with raising funding? Because this is probably something which is the number 1 or 2 biggest concerns for startups. Yeah. How did you go about it?
With a lot of effort. I think the first 4 years were not nice at all. It was super tough. And we raised very, very, very small amounts, like super small, like 20 here, 10 there, 30 there. But each time, at least I had a slightly bigger story to tell, or a slightly more plausible story that this was going at least somewhere, right? I mean, you have to remember, if you do this, you have no right to exist, right? You need to earn your right to exist. I mean, it's fine to have an ambition to be an entrepreneur, to build a company or found one, but you have no God-given right to that. You need to earn it. So you will always need to add value for whatever investor you approach. So we started, very small amounts, very, 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 very small amounts. The absolute minimum, giving away the absolute minimum.
It's a small amount, but how do you value a company at the early stage? How did you go about the valuation of the company?
With a lot of, well, what is the best word for that? In a slightly delusional way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the better way of doing it. And then see what you can get once they start to poke at your delusion. And play hardball. I mean, I always, and I don't know really why I did it in that way, but I mean, it must be, I think it's just what I am, but I mean, I'd always rather die as a company, that is, than take money on bad terms.
Okay, so very persistent but fair.
I would say.
So the early investors were angel investors?
Yeah.
And when did you start looking more seriously into the venture capital community?
Oh, as soon as I knew they existed from that Google meeting, then I started Googling what a venture capitalist was. And then I looked on the Wikipedia page, and I thought, okay, if you're on Wikipedia, you must be good. And I found their email addresses, and I approached them. And so I wrote to Michael Moritz and all these kind of guys in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Did they respond?
Yeah. They actually did. And that was the peculiar thing, I think, because my CV was so bizarre and so unusual. I mean, a long, big, fat medical CV made them mostly curious. They didn't invest, but they still entertained my... my little rant, I think. And so no, I was always looking for VC money, just couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And then the first VC money came in 2015, 2016.
I think you're right, because you have an unusual background, and one of my best friends is a psychiatrist, and he comes to court cases and he decides if somebody's sane or not. And when we go out, anytime somebody finds out he's a psychiatrist, people just want to talk to him. And
they won't talk to him.
They want to talk to him.
Yes, it can go both ways.
Yes, and he doesn't like it because he's not working, because people just he tells us that they leave a big baggage with him, and he doesn't like it because if they want to talk to him, they should come to your office and book an appointment. So I can understand why people would respond to you, because they have an interesting background. And so you started raising funding from VCs, and who were the first VCs you started talking to, and how did you get introduction to them? Or a meeting with them?
I emailed them. And
out of nowhere?
Yeah, out of absolutely nowhere.
Oh, interesting.
Put a very attractive subject line in, which I cannot remember, so that they would open it. And then it was a very well-crafted, articulate email with stats that I thought were fancy but weren't. And then a long business plan, which made no sense.
So you wrote an email with a fairly short email body and a presentation in it?
Even worse, I wrote a short email with nice sentences and then a 50 pages business plan.
Okay.
Don't even ask. I mean, if I now think back, this was folly and crazy.
Yeah.
And then gradually, of course, you get better at it and you evolve to, well, you start to learn all these terms, like teaser deck and all that kind of stuff. Always lots of graphs, always upward slopes, always pictures of the amazing people I had managed to recruit. Always full of optimism, even if you had no penny in the bank.
So this is like 4 years ago, and now you raised the latest round in May, 80 million.
80, yeah.
So 80 million is a lot of money for Series B. How did you go about fundraising this time around? How did it change compared to the earlier stages of fundraising?
Well, there was something in between, right? So we raised 2 from the States in 2015, summer 2015. And then we raised 20. So that was our A round. And that was, I mean, I'm sharing this because some of you...
And who was the investor for the 20?
The same one of the 80, a European fund actually called PPF.
Yeah.
But that was interesting, and I said I'm sharing that with because some of you are on probably a similar journey, and we had a very big internal discussion, and actually we fought over it, over how much should we raise? How much should you raise when you just raised 2 million? I mean, with 2 million we knew we had a 9-month lifeline, not longer than that. Okay. And then traditionally you would go raise maybe 4 or 5 or 6. And I wanted to go for 20, and that in itself was the source of a heated argument. And with hindsight, you're always right. But the reason that I wanted to go for 20 was that, in my opinion, with 5 or 6, we could never add enough value to raise the sort of money we really needed in the next round to go somewhere. So then I'd rather have died faster than have died 9 months later. Yeah. Then we happened to raise the 20, and then when we did the 20. Everything changed, because in these first years when you have no money, you can think, right? That's the one thing you can do, you can think. And with that 20, we could finally execute against all that thinking that we had been doing. And our graphs and our stats went through the roof. And then everything becomes a lot easier. Then there were real stats that went through the roof. So we had suddenly we went from 3 million monthly uniques to 20 million. We had these billions of video views. It became very attractive for investors. Yeah.
Okay, so you started to grow. What were your biggest early mistakes when you look back now? And how would you change them? How did you go about them? How did you avoid those mistakes? And how would you do them differently today when you look back?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the things I would actually do in the same way. I mean, with the variables at least I had at that point in time, they always seemed the right decision on the basis of those variables. If you then later learn new variables, okay, you do it differently. But with the variables I had, it seemed always sensible. The one thing that I feel was for us particularly challenging, and again, it's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of decision. We opened an office overseas earlier than we could actually handle. And then we filled it with salespeople. And so we had an overseas office in the US that had only a certain segment of our workforce. Yeah. And we weren't enough there, and we couldn't actually properly handle that. So that's something that I would, with hindsight, do differently, for sure.
So you mentioned sales. There's a question here on Slido. What is your pricing model? How do you make money? Very simple question.
Well, we raise money, and we make some.
Make money by raising them.
But no, we do make some. So there's basically 3 strands to our business model. So the first one is what is called branded content that you may be familiar with.
Okay,
so
yes.
Yeah. So us making content for brands, not about those brands, but the brands associate themselves with the content we make, and we deliver them a certain number of eyeballs, and they pay a fee for that.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. And then the second one is through what we call our travel sales, and that's a whole funnel model. So if you think about it, you book your hotel, your Airbnb flats on these OTA websites, but a lot of other stuff happens before you book. You surf around for content, you look around for inspiration. Yeah. So with our content, we give you that inspiration, and then we try to guide you to also converting with us.
You have commissions from the sales.
Yeah. Exactly. And then the third strand that we've only now more recently started to do, I mean, because our content has, of course, become bigger and better and more interesting. So we're launching our first fictional short film soon. So those are creative assets that you can actually then start thinking of licensing.
Interesting. Also, you becoming like a media producer as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Short films, or you eventually looking into long?
Short films, documentaries, animation.
Interesting. Okay, now you have your own website, your own content. How do you think about social media? Because you also have quite a significant social presence, Instagram and so on. And how do you develop and monetize content there? What's your strategy?
Social media for us is important, very important, because our audience is largely, or a good chunk of it is millennial. So one of the key channels to reach a millennial audience is social, right? So that's a given. Yeah. Video works particularly well on social and visual assets, so we're well equipped to work with what they want as in the channels. But it's mostly a brand awareness play. We don't see it so much as lead generation for conversion. It works, but it doesn't work remotely as well as with people who come directly to the website, which makes sense. And it works also substantially less well than the search use case.
You're mentioning branded content, and there's lots of branded content options on Snapchat and Instagram and so on. Do you run your own channels there for other brands, or just for your brand, for your company?
We've done a series called Hunger Lust with Snapchat, which is a series of around food culture. So that we've done. And then if we work with brands, then we distribute wherever we think is the best way of getting them what they want in terms of eyeballs, be it our own channel or indeed and other channels where we distribute. Yes.
You mentioned partnerships like with Snapchat. How hard do you find to establish these partnerships, and which ones have worked in the past and which ones do you focus on now?
Sure. We haven't done many in the past. Again, for reference, we are now just under 300 employees. About a year and a half ago, we were only 12 or 13.
Wow.
So a lot of what we do has only started fairly recently.
Yeah. Do you recognize all of the faces?
Pardon?
Do you recognize all of the faces of your coworkers or not anymore?
Recognize the faces for sure. Being able to name them all, less so.
Okay.
Yeah, less so. Less successfully so. But I do welcome lunches with everybody every week with the new people. I do a welcome lunch, and then it gets a bit better.
Okay, nice. Now, on the partnership that you are now focusing on right now or in the future, which companies would you love your company to work with, which you don't yet, or which you're starting to work with?
It's an interesting challenge for us because we raised 80. We will probably try and raise another round. I mean, with the ambitions we have, we obviously think quite big. So you have an issue of what we call frenemies. On the one hand, you're keen to work with the big platforms because obviously they give you a reach and a sort of associated brand authority. By working with Snap, it's good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes us look good. On the other hand, we're not there to make them money. And we're definitely not there to allow these frenemies to cannibalize us. So an interesting case in point would be things like Airbnb or TripAdvisor. So we are testing a partnership with TripAdvisor, but of course they also offer places to stay. We do too. So it's always like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, testing and learning, and always making sure that we can get back out if we want to.
Okay. You're growing really fast. So you said 18 people 2 years ago. How many?
No, about 15, 16.
15 people 2 years ago, and today we are 300.
Thereabout, yeah.
And you just raised another big round, which means you need to spend it, you need to invest it, and you also invested in hiring new people. What kind of people are you mostly do you want to hire?
Yeah, we're talking about that quite a bit actually. Now that we're 200 people later.
Okay.
Yeah, because we didn't actually necessarily preset that, and maybe we could have preset it a bit more. I mean, some of our talent team is here actually, and they've been filling a lot of these roles that we were looking for. But if you're asking for criteria, I mean, I was involved in about 40 hires or so. So what I personally...
So you don't hire anymore?
What?
You don't hire personally anymore?
No, I do.
Still do?
Yeah, I was involved in about 40 in the past year. Now I have to become more selective because also I don't have the time. But I always look for actually, I would say first and foremost, I would say smarts for sure. I mean, and the value that the people would bring.
Yeah.
I don't like who does people who are a bit more on the asshole side of things. So you try to avoid that. It's not worth it, right? And I love it if there's connection, of course, to the stuff we do. If they can have that sort of create. It's not necessary for all the roles. Like technically speaking, a front-end engineer, he or she doesn't need to like books or travel.
Yeah.
It's not necessary, but it makes everything smoother if they do. So I look for that, and then I try to work out a little bit actually whether they have judgment and common sense. I find it a bit overlooked, but ever so important, of course.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. So you say there are some people from your team here.
Yeah.
Can you raise your hand in case somebody is here? So you see the hands. If you want, just go and speak to them after the event. If you keen on working in the travel media space, why not? I would. It's a good company. I think they're going to be becoming unicorn soon, hopefully.
Let's hope. We're looking still for a lot of people. So if you're in data science or engineering or design or anything really, go talk to the guys.
Yeah. Now, Chris, your business model keeps evolving. Who do you currently disrupt on in the world right now?
The best way, I think, to think about us in that regard is more or less as follows. You have the players at the so-called tip of the funnel, where you go to book your travel, Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia, big names, big players. If I asked the audience who do you use to book your travels, you would probably say any of those 4 names. What these guys are now facing is a battle of incremental wins, because they all do the same, and they pay billions actually to Google to appear high in search, and it's a very tight battle there. They have nothing really that sets them properly apart.
Yeah.
Now they want to, of course, and they are really looking to go what is called up the funnel, to indeed reach their users in an earlier stage of their travel planning, like you all do when you search around for content and you look around on Instagram and you Google around. They want to engage users earlier. They can do that via producing content themselves or having a content offering on their own platforms. Of course, they are not built for that. We are very much built for that. So there is a lot of interest in the travel industry in us, because they see us as a top of funnel possible acquisition for their bottom or tip of funnel offering.
Yeah.
So we're complementing them as opposed to disrupting them, I suppose.
Okay. Now, if you look into the future, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, who do you think will disrupt your business model?
I expect that we will be, I hope we will be, and I think we will be battling with Airbnb, I think. Okay. I think that we share an audience, we share an ambition, and we're going after the same big, full funnel, winner-takes-all kind of proposition. Of course, they are way down the line. That's not to say that this cannot be done.
Do you see them focusing on content as much as you do?
They are. They will. Everybody, well, not everybody, but people in the industry know. I mean, there will be Airbnb studios launching next year in LA. So they're definitely going into the content and entertainment space.
Interesting.
So our plan is to become them faster than they can become us. Sounds crazy, but...
It does, it does. Okay, I'm asking about disruption because 10 years ago, the world's most popular mobile phone was Nokia. It doesn't exist anymore. And we discussed earlier with Chris, 20 years ago, Netflix came to Blockbuster. And they offered Blockbuster to buy Netflix for 50 million. And Blockbuster CEO just laughed at it and he sent them away saying, this is never going to work. Exactly 10 years later, Blockbuster went bankrupt. And Netflix, we all know what happened with them. So it's a super fast time. And in your space, there are people who used to be big in the past and it's changing very, very fast. So I like the way you approach content because it's not just content which is mediocre just for Google to pick you up and give you backlinks, but it's really good content. How do you manage to find the content writers? Are they freelancers or you employ them in-house?
Yeah, so that's something we became really good at over the years, testing out various versions of this model. But now we are really good at identifying people who we think are capable writers for us, or capable videographers, or capable photographers. And there's a team of about 100 in-house that works with and around content, and they then commission content from about 300-400 people all over the world.
And these are full-time people?
The people in-house are full-time. Yeah. The freelancers are typically not. Yeah. And this is very scalable. We can scale this at will. We can make this if we want 3,000 or 4,000, 10,000 contributors.
Which are the content areas you're focusing on mostly? Is it so culture, obviously, travel?
Now our focus really has turned to identifying and creating content that maps onto the so-called funnel. So when thinking about travel, actually going into properly planning it and booking it, what content do you need to do all that? And what are markets that are of particular interest to us? Those are the key components of our focus. So we've identified about 12 or so cities where we're really now honing in deep to get the funnel to work, as we call it.
Yes. You as a CEO of the company and the founder, are you able to just look at Culture Trip as a user, just read through something interesting when you...
Yeah, definitely.
When you're off work?
I read every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's go to some questions from the audience, and you can also tweet at us if you want. You see the hashtag over here. Feel free. So the questions are, this one interesting is, do you intend to use AI to automate content creation?
Yes, we are already. So AI for us, I mean, there's two certainties, I feel. A lot is uncertain, but there's two certainties in the world, for lack of a better word. I mean, one is not even emergence, but the pending dominance of China and Chinese culture. Yep. Super important for us, and we're very keen on getting going in China for that reason. The other key area for us of investment, long-term investment, is AI and machine learning, which we try to apply in a number of different ways. So one is indeed, the automated or semi-automated commissioning of content. So we build what we call demand and need dashboard, where we can really see what do people in general search for online, as in Google, and what do we see in terms of user behavior on our own website, and how can we match and mix these two sources of data to have our commissioners commission content with a higher likelihood of return, as in a higher likelihood in traffic or in growth. So if you, for example, there is about, I believe, 20,000 times as many searches for restaurants around Borough Market than there are for restaurants around London Bridge. They are 200 yards apart, but you would never know that. So, and that this is not stymieing at all their creativity. You just guide them to write a similar-ish article, but you make them take it from a slightly different angle that has a higher ROI. And then there's a whole personalization and search and recommendation play to it. And tools, right? I mean, there's so much stuff that, I mean, if AI is electricity, then in media, it hasn't really gone on yet, right? I mean, like copy editing is the same as it was 20 years ago. Picture research is the same as it was 20 years ago. So much stuff you can do actually to disrupt the content creation as well.
True. You know, we had, back in June, we had the founder of Lonely Planet here. He's a big traveler. And did lots of travel content as well. And he likes to travel with the travel editor, I think, of The Independent. How do you see those traditional media like The Guardian, The Independent and so on, the travel sections? Is this complementary to what you're offering, or it's a competition?
I find them really interesting. I think we actually have made their afterthoughts our core business, right? Their afterthoughts are the weekend supplements and lifestyle and travel content. They are afterthoughts. For us, they are our core business. We don't do news. We don't do current affairs. We might at some point, but today we're not. So that's one thing in which I'm looking at them.
So you see that them outsourcing this content for travel to you eventually?
No, not that. But I find it interesting to observe how that tension that they have between news and non-news content, how they find it incredibly difficult to handle that, because news is extremely difficult to monetize. In fact, to my mind, it's almost unmonetizable. Yeah. Whereas our verticals are super monetizable. And my hunch is, or my hypothesis is that these companies will continue to crumble, regardless of how much demand for it there is. Their content creation economics and their business models do not stack up, right? Okay. And they know that. I mean, and they seem to be unable to solve that, unable to turn a workforce and a content creation and business model around. And you see it in broadcasting too. I mean, they to my mind, will ultimately crumble under their own weight and cost of creation, which I like. Yes.
Okay. Now, next question is, why did you decide to found the company alone? Tell us more about your starting team, please, and the considerations in founding it. So why are you the lonely founder?
Yeah, I like that question, actually. I mean, you have to know yourself, and you have to get to know yourself. I mean, let me answer slightly differently. I mean, for me, that was only ever going to be me as a sole founder. I mean, I tried it actually somewhere along the road to have a co-founder, it didn't work at all. That's not to say that I'm a raging dictator. It's not that. But I mean, you have to know yourself a little bit, I think, and I think it's a lonely undertaking, and it's an irrational undertaking. And I don't know how you split irrationality, really. When I invest, I mean, because I do make angel investments too.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
In travel only or any area?
Depends, I think. It depends. Broad areas. Yeah. Okay. Areas that I'm interested in. If I make a big bet, it's always on the sole founder. If I make a small bet, it's always on co-founders. Co-founders will give me a return, but it will, in my opinion, rarely be as high as the sole founder will make me, because the sole founder, in my opinion, is the more irrational and unreasonable creature, and therefore has a higher probability to create irrational and unreasonable returns. But the risk, of course, is also higher that deluded sole founder just implodes.
A car accident and then the company goes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a trade-off, but there's no right or wrong in it. You have to know yourself. You have to know what you want.
Okay. From the numbers you mentioned, it seems like your company has a big burn rate per month. It's about $1 million or more, right now?
I haven't looked recently.
Monthly. How do you manage your expenses? Do you use any tools which help you stay healthy?
It's not that hard, and it's not as big as you think. The expenses, as you call them. I mean, and obviously we pay them, but we follow just standard procedures and use standard software. Nothing too fancy. I mean, our main cost is headcount today, right?
Okay. All right. So next question is, how do you think about competition? Lonely Planet versus a lot of online content players. Is there room for several players in the medium term? I think we slightly partly already answered the question, but what do you think about the competition? Who do you consider your key competition right now?
Sure. So at the top of the funnel, that's where these guidebooks sits and the magazines, the Condé Nast Travelers, the Lonely Planets, the Time Out. So all these names that I mentioned are strong brands. You all know them. But for none of you, they are the go-to brand where you start your travel. Some of you go there, some of you don't go there. The starting point for travel today in the millennial generation, at least, seems to be more Instagram, if anything else. So I look at Instagram and I see what Instagram is doing. If Instagram or any of the social platforms turns its attention to travel, then that's something to watch. Not concerned about Lonely Planet and Condé Nast Traveler. I mean, our audience is already bigger than theirs. I have a lot of respect for them because they did an amazing job actually to have built brands that 50 years later everybody still knows, albeit that not everybody uses them. So competitors I look at is Instagram and then Airbnb, very much so. Very much look at Airbnb and look at Netflix too, because we are not competing with Netflix, no, but we are trying to win to an extent in travel through our creativity and getting more sophisticated in our creative expression. And therefore, Netflix is the company to look at. They are maybe the most successful company around in terms of creativity and entertainment, but they are.
You want to become like a partner for travel-related content with them?
Potentially.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, next question is, other than maybe the bookstore, what were the moments when you wanted to give up? How did you keep going?
I never had that, actually, if I'm perfectly honest. And it's not something, again, rational that I can readily explain. I've never had that.
And right now, what is your biggest challenge you're going through at the company?
What would I say? On the recruitment side, data science to an extent. I mean, data science is such a competitive field, really difficult to find the top hires we want, so I would call that a challenge. For us now also, for me, the next scale level, we're 300. I mean, the increase will go on. We'll probably scale more internationally, so that's something that I think about a fair bit, how to run the company if it's indeed proper multi-site.
Cool. Now a few more questions, and then we can wrap it up. Was being solo founder a big obstacle in your early funding rounds? How did you convince investors? Because investors, they don't like to invest in solo founders.
And to be honest, nobody has ever raised that, ever. They've always asked, do you have a CTO? But nobody has ever raised, do you have a co-founder? Never.
Okay.
So,
not a problem for you. Cool.
No, it was never asked. I mean, so therefore, I suppose it was not a problem. Yeah.
Interesting. Does culture trips early days, during culture trips early days, how exactly did you reach and incentivize people to create content for you?
Say that again? I didn't hear that.
During culture trips early days, how exactly did you reach and incentivize people to create content for you?
Yeah. So the first years we were based in a very small office in Elfton Castle, and we hired people on very short-term contracts because, per definition, 3 months later the money was up. We knew that. And the first years were all in-house people who came to the office to create content with us, but this was 6, 7 people, no more than that. And then we started building out that model of freelancers, and we paid as much as we could afford, which wasn't much, but enough for people to do it. And then there was the, I guess, added exposure that worked somewhat as an incentive to be on a platform that clearly even then was growing. I mean, now 1 million users a month looks very small from where we're now at, but that is still an enormous number compared to most people who start out. So to be on there, in combination with payment, was not causing us any problems really to then indeed attract the talent to work with us. Moreover, there is a lot of people with creative talents that have no outlet for it and that are very keen to work with a company that seems to make that its core business.
Okay. Which book changed your life? That's a tough one.
The Mismeasure of Men. This is a book by a biologist called Stephen Gould, and to me it did change my life, because he really looked at how to best put that, how human beings indeed then have gone about measuring literally everything, which would generally be seen as a good thing, because from measurement and data you can infer things, but then have drawn so many awfully wrong conclusions from collecting all these data. I mean, racism, for example, is irrational, but people have come to that from a so-called pseudo-rational scientific basis. The whole eugenics movement was at that point in time called science. So reading that book and having the actual evidence there to debunk all that kind of crap was as a medic, I found it definitely changed my life. There's so many books that changed my life. That was one.
Okay, can you give us one business book which you really like and would like to recommend?
Again, there's quite a few, I think. I think I read a few of these founder biographies, which are interesting in the sense that you know you're not alone with your traits.
Give us one or two.
What?
Give us one or two of these.
I mean, like everybody else, I think I read the Steve Jobs biography, but I read it as a psychiatrist, and then it's not so pretty.
Interesting.
I more recently read the OKR book of John Doerr.
Yes. OKR.
Yeah, because that's the operating system we work around.
Uh-huh.
I think I read all the books that have become relatively well known, and I read all the tech stories. I read a ton of articles, still do. A lot. I think for me, reading is maybe the biggest differentiator in the early days that you can go for, because it's free, and you can actually, you can outread the incumbents. Right?
You can, but how do you find the time? Because you're on these crossroads of having to grow the company and manage people versus reading a lot. What's your trade-off? What's the secret?
I don't know. You sleep less.
So you sleep 2 hours?
No, I don't sleep 2 hours, but I cut into my sleep to do things that I find essential. Yeah.
Okay, what's your management style? How do you lead your team? Do you delegate a lot, or you tend to oversight lots of
I like to know what's going on, for sure. It kind of self-regulates, right? I mean, as you scale up, I mean, you have to adapt and you have to adjust. It's not easy. It really isn't easy, because I find if you scale up as fast as we do as well, I mean, my own job and everybody else's job changes every 3 months. And every new senior hire that comes in slightly changes the picture, or massively changes the picture, and massively changes the dynamic. So, I mean, I have no problem, definitely no problem with delegation, but I have some, I would say, not reluctance, but I find it not necessarily easy to, from day one, trust a person. I mean, that they know what they should know to then go on and do well on their own. So I get quite pedantic over that knowledge transfer. I want them to know what we know already and then run with that. But that first window where they don't know what we already know, that I find an actually relatively stressful window, and I have had to get better at not getting so stressed over that, because it's normal that, of course, people don't know what you know, and that it takes a bit of time to take these things that we have tested.
And how's the company structure? Do you have teams which are responsible for one area only, or you have also matrix teams, project management teams? How do you
all these things, actually. At first, when you're small, I mean, it's like a family, right? And you just you talk to each other. Then you go into functional teams, because that's also how you hire. You have a marketing team, you have a sales team, etc. And then again, as you scale further up, you have to build then matrix teams and cross-functional teams, which is very much where we're now at.
Okay, there was one question which I like here. It's about the early stages. How did you get early hires excited about joining Culture Trip at the very beginning?
I'm not too sure. I just told them more or less, I think, what we were doing and where I thought it could be going, and seemingly that was more or less enough. I think it's a very friendly environment. I mean, when you come in, people are really friendly and very, in general, excited about where they are and where this thing can go. So then, besides these conversations I had myself, I think, with them, when I first spoke to them, if that then gets corroborated by what you meet at your first office visit, I don't know. I mean, those two things, I suppose. The subject matter is attractive, right? Don't forget that. I mean, it's not a hard sell to work in and around creative and travel content. It's attractive, it's interesting. Even the engineers say that they deal with, not even the engineers, but the engineers who technically don't read what they deal in, they do, and they find it inspiring.
Okay, a few tougher questions. One is, when will you hit profitability? And there's also a question about what are your sales in 2018?
I haven't done the math on what the sales are for this year, so I can't quite answer that. Profitability is not particularly on my mind at this point in time, or on our mind. I mean, making money is. Making a profit, not so much. It's more.
I'm sure when you're raising the Series B, they were asking you about when do you when you break even?
No.
Really?
No. The question is.
I want to speak to investors.
Try. Good luck. But no, it's more about what is the flywheel. What is the flywheel that we can identify within this business to accelerate it further. That's been what is driving that. But again, I mean, with this gold strip thing, I mean. It is an unusual business, obviously not because it's mine, but I mean, it's unusual in the sense that it has that winner takes all potential, and that follows a different logic for funding and risk.
Yes.
Than the business build to exit would follow. I think that's something to separate. I mean, it looks less and less likely that we would miserably fail. We still can. But it has an immense upside, and because of that immense upside, it follows a different logic. The conversations with investors, we look like we could do it, and then the price is so big that 80 million. I mean, if you cross off the zero, it's not so crazy.